Alright, so there's a patch that's came out today for Total War Warhammer 3. I was kind of curious if I should talk about it very much, but apparently just a quick look shows that there is some stuff, some meaty stuff to talk about. Alright, there's a new legendary hero, apparently, and I figured, okay, well, they're gonna release the legendary hero later today, and it'll be revealed on the Warhammer Fest stream, which I will also be recording, though I doubt there will be anything exciting if they've already revealed the legendary hero in the patch notes. Which I did have the legendary hero revealed to me just by opening up my YouTube subscriptions. Uh, Spoilers, I guess, for anyone who doesn't want to be spoiled on it. But it is Harold Hammerstorm, old Harry the Hammerer. Very old school Warhammer character, if he's even really, you can call him a character. He's the guy from the cover of, like, the original Warhammer rulebook. Something like that. I believe later on they did make him a playable character on the tabletop with a set of rules, but they didn't really give him much of a story. They'll probably be giving him more of a story in Total War Warhammer. That'll be interesting to see. Bretonnia is getting some changes and rebalances. The Chaos Dwarfs now have the Will of Hashut in-game crisis. There will be some new regiments of renown. And we gear up for the next content drop. Okay, which will of course be Patch 4.0, the Shadows of Change DLC, which will almost certainly be the Changeling, the Monkey King, and Mother Astankia, with a legendary hero for Cathay or Kislev, I am willing to bet. And then on to the next one, which would be Tamarkon, Elspeth von Draken, somebody for the Dwarfs. I'm still inclined to say Grim Berlikson. I did say in the last video that I made about this that I thought there was a good chance of Malachi McKyson just because he has such a unique design and he's a Slayer engineer, and that's going to be cooler for a lot of people. But folks in the comments pointed out correctly that if Malachi McKyson is a legendary lord for the dwarfs, then that means you can't take him as a legendary hero as Kislev, Cathay, or the Empire. And it'd be weird if you could get Gotrek, Gurnison, Felix Jaeger, and Ulrika Magdova, but you could not get Malachi McKyson. So, probably more likely Malachi McKyson's going to be a legendary lord for several factions. The Nemesis Crown, I still think, is just going to be a generic mechanic that everybody gets. It's not going to be an introduction of any of those characters. Okay, so, let's see. New legendary hero. Who is it? Well, we don't want to spoil the surprise. Tune into Warhammer Skulls. Oh, Zerkovich is going to be in trouble, ain't he? Whoops. Alright. Chaos Dwarf in-game crisis. They start drilling into the land and expanding invasion tunnels. It will be, I presume, you stop the crisis by hitting Zarnagrund. And it sounds like Chaos Dwarf armies will just appear somewhere on the map because they're tunneling. Okay. Makes sense, because otherwise you don't want all the Chaos Dwarfs to just be a problem in the Darklands, because the Darklands are very easily contained. Alright, we got a Cathay Regiment of Renown. The Bandits of the Silver Road. These brigands have a fearsome reputation at home and in the West. Excuse me. Just a little bit stuck there. They have even been hired by the dragon rulers of their homeland, despite their indiscriminate pillaging. Okay, so this is a shielded archer unit. We've had shielded missile units before. We've had plenty of them. But this is the first shielded archer unit they've shown who is wearing a shield while they're carrying the bow at the same time in their hand. So that's kind of neat. They also have flaming missile attacks and Vanguard deploy. And they provide weakness to fire. The interesting thing there is the idea that the Cathayan dragons are perfectly willing to hire bandits and thugs. That seems like that wouldn't be very harmonious. Man, you can see even in the screenshot the terrible, like, what's the word for it? I don't recall the word for it, and I'm running on limited time here because the Warhammer Skulls event is going to start in a little bit, and we'll record it just in case something funny or cool happens. But you can tell the threshold for when a model gets low poly kicks in just way too early with Crib Assembly's default standard settings. That doesn't make any sense. I should have just said default settings. You really need a mod to fix that. And even in Crib Assembly's own screenshots, you can see it. It's really bizarre. I assume that it's a thing Crib Assembly put in to try and artificially increase the frame rate because there are currently a lot of optimization problems with the game. Hounds of the Blood Hunt, its regiment of renowned flesh hounds. Khorne's loathing to see his chosen servants felled by the cowardly practice of the arcane is made manifest in flesh hounds, mostly immune to hostile magic. Isn't the gimmick of flesh hounds already that they're more or less immune to magic? Oh, they temporarily remove magical attacks. Dampen. Interesting. I feel like that's a ability that's going to be used more by modders than by anybody else. Watchmen in the Night? The existence of the Tsarina's secret police is no secret. For the Watchmen's ranks are not just the spies who root out opposition to her rule, but also the toughest of her retinue. The Watchmen drop the pistols of the armored Cossairs. I think it's what's neat about the armored Cossairs is they have missile attacks, even though they're a heavily armored melee unit. But nonetheless, usually used in favor of a second hand weapon, making them really solid anti-infantry combatants. The ability Rabble Rouse also helps to keep nearby troops immune to fear and terror. Okay, so they provide immune to psychology as well. Kind of an odd little unit. I'm not a Regiment of Renown user at all, so... Which I probably should change that, because there are a lot of interesting Regiments of Renown. But I'm just... That's just the way it is for me. The Frolicker's Bubonic. The acrid discharge of these Nurglings' blisters inflicts wounds upon all those who strike them that may not outright kill, but painfully fester. So they have melee damage reflection. And they lose Cloud of Flies in favor of it, excuse me. In exchange for it, I'm a little bit tongue-tied today. The Princes of Perfection. In the quest for perfection, one must revel in their obsessions and sacrifice everything for the Dark Prince. These definitely look a lot pimpier than your standard Marauders. They are very staunch spears with perfect vigor and soporific musk. Perfect vigor is pretty good. Especially on a Slaanesh unit. Let's see. Chromatic Aberrations. Abominations, excuse me. Defense, for these blue horrors, defense is the best offense, emitting chromatic barriers to render incoming attacks futile as they inflict their own. So it's blue horrors that have more ammo, so they can actually be used as a ranged unit, where most blue horrors only have like 3 shots, so you need to put them into melee sooner rather than later. As well as having a powerful barrier replenishment ability that triggers anytime a spell is cast on the battlefield. By a friendly or enemy spellcaster. That's interesting. A lot of these Regiment of Renown effects I look at and I think, well, that could be put to really interesting use by a modder. For instance, I could see Kataf's Krakadrak, Kataf's Norse Dwarfs, using this spell dampening, this magical attack dampening. And for the blue horrors, that is interesting, a ability that specifically recharges barrier. That could be put to really interesting use by maybe the Albion mod, I don't know. Boglars of the Mad Marshes. These so-called toad noblars were once a much-debated myth amongst scholars, said to have the ability to multiply at the merest contact with water. These boglars come with poison as a standard, but also have the uncanny ability to regenerate entities when standing in water. That's actually kind of funny and neat. Abilities specifically for standing in water, yet another thing I can see modders using. This one in particular I can see the Fimir mod using, because the Fimir mod features a lot of boglars. Keep this unit firmly planted in the water for maximum combat effectiveness. Never feed a boglar after midnight. Okay, I get the reference. Alright, Pretonia update. Damsels now benefit from the Troths feature. Yeah, I always thought it was weird that they didn't. I understand that for the Prophetesses they had to give them some kind of equivalent to the Vow mechanic, just because the Vow mechanic is how you gain access to Grail Knights, at least at not an absurd price. The final vow or troth in the series grants permanent access to the Blessing of the Lady for any character who obtains it, which is 20% physical resist if the unit has never fled, if memory serves. They wanted to make notifications for the Vows and Troths system, but there is too much spaghetti code in either the Vows and Troths system or the notification system, so they can't do it. There's going to be a lot of people who are very upset about that and say Crave Assembly is lazy. I get it. Some of this stuff, it's spaghetti code. A lot of this stuff you have to make in the moment, and you don't get really the time or money to build things to be more available for the next guy, more easier to modify for the next guy. There's a comic, I want to say an XKCD comic, funnily enough. I have one of those in my bookmarks that pretty well says, every system that was built to just get it done, be done in the moment, is the system that gets used over and over again. While the systems that were built to be easily modified, to be modular, I guess, wind up never getting used again. Which I don't think, I'm not a tech expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not a coding guy. But that does always seem to be what I hear about. Oh, I got a bit of empty stomach sickness. I just woke up, so excuse me. Then again, it seems like everything gets me sick to my stomach. Blessing of the Lady stat bonuses have changed as follows. Now provides 15% ward save. Alright then. That seems quite strong. Yeah, that's gonna be, I guess that's to make Bretonnia less weak against demons. But sheesh, that's strong. Yeah, they're saying they changed it to ward save because now there's so many more units with magic attacks that physical resistance doesn't mean much. The Blessing of the Lady can now be equipped to units in custom battle. Certain units, mostly Grail Knights and non-Grail Knight characters, can opt to take Blessing of the Lady for 200 gold. This does not affect Grail Knight characters or the Fey Enchantress. So that's an interesting change for multiplayer. There is now the Knight and Peasant attributes. All Knight and Knight characters have received the new Knight attribute. Okay, so we're using the attribute system that was just implemented for the Chaos Dwarfs. The what's it called? I forget what it is. But it's, you get the idea. It's that the Chaos Dwarfs don't take morale losses from losing their Greenskin Slave or Hobgoblin units. And then there's a tiered below where the Hobgoblins don't lose leadership from losing Greenskin Slave units. Now it seems they're applying that to the Bretonians. So Knights and Knight characters now have the Knight attribute and do not take leadership penalties if any unit with the Peasant attribute routes nearby. Peasants have the Peasant attribute, which has no inherent gameplay effects but is used for ability and attribute targeting purposes. Knights Errant have received a new passive ability, Impetuous. When Knights Errant are charging, any friendly unit within 35 meters becomes immune to psychology for 30 seconds. Really? So now you want Knights Errant in your Bretonian armies just to give nearby units the immune to psychology buff. That would make Knights Errant really good for any kind of army as Bretonia, because you can combo them with peasants to make the peasants be considerably less cowardly, or you can combo them with the other knights to make the knights even more courageous than usual. Or, well, it would only really apply to Knights of the Realm, I think. Because Questing Knights and Grail Knights already have immune to psychology, don't they? I could be wrong about that. Peasant units have had the expendable attribute removed, as the Knight and Peasant attributes now cover that gameplay interaction. The implication of that, I wonder... Trebuchets would have been a unit that wasn't expendable before, but would count as a Peasant unit now, right? I don't know, I'm curious what the implications of that are. Because it just simply used to be that all Peasant units were expendable, which had ultimately the same effects as the Knight and Peasant system does now, I think. Alright, all Peasants received a new passive ability, the Peasant's Duty. Oh, okay, here we go. This is what it means. Okay, so Knights don't care if Peasants rout. Peasants get a leadership buff from Knights being within 55 meters. That is taken from the tabletop. That's cool to see. That is cool to see. Yeah, all these systems are very fun for making a lot of these races play more like they did in the tabletop in ways like that. And the Peasant infantry units have overall had their leadership reduced slightly to account for this change. Okay. They love a good charge, them errant boys do. Heard in a tavern near Montfort. And there are many unit changes listed below. Okay, Grail Knights and Grail Guardians have been rebalanced at lower entity counts, 48 and 32 respectively. That does make sense. It was always a bit odd you got as many as you got of the Knights of the Realm. This also makes it easier to pick out the cavalry units at a distance. That's nice. Grail Knights and Grail Guardians are now armor-piercing. That is a big change. Yeah, that is a very big change for Bretonia. Hippogriff Knights now have the full Grail package. So they have magical attacks, perfect vigor, and Blessing of the Lady. Ooh. Yeah, those are some big buffs. Presumably the cost has gone up massively as well. But yeah, that makes Hippogriff Knights way stronger. Whew. The unit has also had their collisions optimized a bit, and 4 entities have been added to the unit. So there are now 4 more Hippogriff Knights. That's cool. The Grail Relic has been relieved of its leadership buffing role. Interesting, what's that mean? Now that Knights prop up the leadership of peasants, it means the Grail Relic doesn't have to carry the peasants as hard as it once did. To reflect this, the Icon of Devotion ability now buffs melee attack, and has had its overall leadership buff reduced slightly. Combining this unit with Knights or a Paladin is now a really good synergy to keep your front line healthy. Interesting. So in this way, peasant-based armies as Bretonnia have instantly became much more viable, because you just simply can, even if you're running a peasant army, have a Knight Lord, or just a single unit of Errant Knights, sitting behind your peasant army, buffing their leadership, while the Grail Relic buffs their melee attack. To what degree does it buff the melee attack? I guess we'll see later. Stability and performance. Fixed a crash related to sounds on VFX. Fixed instances where a soft lock could occur. If I don't see any... I haven't seen any soft locks or crashes, so I don't have any experience with any of these. Gameplay. We now only load the first 25 save games. Dramatically improve the time it takes to open the load game panel. A new button will load the rest of your save games. That's quite nice for a lot of people. I tend to go pretty aggressive with my deletions, though. Added a new delete button that allows you to delete currently loaded save games via campaign. That's odd. We've made further improvements to AI artillery units in walled settlement battles to prevent them from wasting ammo on unnecessary gate-building targets. I'm kind of surprised that they are having the AI artillery bother shooting the walls at all, considering that every mechanic in sieges discourages you from doing that. Or, well, not every mechanic, I'm exaggerating. It's towers. Considering that towers are a mechanic that exists that strongly discourage you from using artillery in sieges. There we go. They will now take extra care when assaulting a wall by no longer attempting to make breaches where there's no need for one. Okay, so these are all for AI siege attackers. I don't see... the AI never attacks my cities. At least never when I have any kind of fighting chance. Maybe some other people see this, but I'm willing to bet most people don't. Because I have put in thousands of hours into this series, I have never once had to play an actually fair siege defense. I auto-resolve it every time. So, any changes made to the siege attacker AI, I will not see them. The overwhelming majority of people will not see them. Unless you are one of those people who insists on playing every single battle. But if it's an obvious loss, I auto-resolve it. This is part of a much wider issue that Total War Warhammer has, that I still think they very much need to fix, but I don't think they'll ever get around to fixing because they want to keep the game from being... Let's be real here. There are instances in Total War, I noticed it distinctly in Shogun, but it happens sometimes in Three Kingdoms as well, where the campaign was made easier by the fact that the AI was more aggressive, and more willing to go after settlements, that it was an even fight to take it as a siege. In Warhammer, I think they have a little bit more focus on trying to make the game more difficult. You can see that with how difficult most of the Immortal Empire start positions are right now, and getting more difficult with every DLC. But also, let's be real here, who is the most popular YouTuber handling Total War Warhammer content? Legend of Total War. What is Legend of Total War's focus? Playing the most difficult campaigns possible. And breaking them and making them not difficult at all. But nonetheless, they are catering to who the audience pays attention to. So the focus is going to continue to be making choices that make the game more difficult, even if they don't necessarily make for more fun and make it where some of the mechanics are more or less irrelevant. It's just the way it is. Yeah, I'm just gonna ignore a lot of this stuff, because it's irrelevant if it's changing the AI attackers. We've made tooltip changes and updates. Okay. I haven't been looking at a lot of the tooltips. There might be some good stuff in there I haven't seen. The mass tooltip, it used to be that the mass was way too high for multi-entity units. Or, excuse me, multiple entities in a model, so stuff like chariots, I assume. It was adding together all of their mass and making for one absurdly large mass number. Now the mass is governed by a single part. Okay, that's useful. They've taken the liberty to update some older mass values to bring cavalry units up to scratch. We got good feedback when it increases the mass of wild riders. Made a few more changes to cavalry mass that will hopefully push us nearer to the sweet spot. We've attempted to break cavalry up into certain mass brackets like light cavalry, regular cavalry, heavy/shock cavalry, monstrous cavalry, and character cavalry. It's still a work in progress. Players must take a Lord-type character as their Lord in a game of domination or survival. Did not know you could choose to not take a Lord. That would be pretty funny. Characters mounted on chariots can once again fire magic missiles. Didn't know that was a problem. Units should be a bit more reliable when attempting to fire magic missiles from walls. And from here is where I'm going to have to go through speedily. This is going to be where a lot of information is. And I do not have that much time. So I'm going to look over it and just see what is worth commenting on. Which, immediately I see, rights have gone back to being locked until you meet their requirements. That was kind of a neat bug, but I understand why they're doing that. Some of the rights are pretty crazy to get on turn 1. Some slight changes to some of the abilities. Blessing the Lady, like they said, has been changed. Let's see. I'm just going through and trying to look at... Okay, the Lance formation. Lance formation has been nerfed. Really? I mean, I like Lance formation. I use it a lot, but most people I observe in the Total War community, which I try not to observe the community too much because it just makes me mad most of the time, but most people in the Total War community, it seems to me, despise the Lance ability and consider it a waste of time, so it's odd to see it nerfed. Oh, excuse me, I'm just getting very sick. I need to eat something. I'll still use it. I still like it, but it's a bit of an odd change. Icon Devotion, the melee attack buff is 5 now. That's pretty good still, especially if you're using on Foot Squires or Grail Pilgrims. Especially considering Foot Squires do have pretty good armor-piercing damage, and I believe anti-infantry, they just lack a bit on the melee attack and melee defense stats, and leadership. Removed Centaur units from the Roiling Death Beastmen technology. Don't know what that means, what that implies. Looks like mass changes across the board. Mass buffs for the Manticore was a bit weird. And here we go. Let's see. Lewin now has magical attacks because he's a Grail Knight. No duh. Buffs to all of his stuff. Wow. Yeah, on Bequist. Why does he have a regular Hippogriff mount? Shouldn't he just have Bequist? Whatever. Yeah, buffs to mass, to damage, to melee attack, melee defense. Yeah, Lewin is going to be even stronger than before, and Lewin's always been one of my favorite legendary lords in the game. So I'm not going to complain about that. And they didn't even increase the cost of Lewin Leoncoeur. They've slightly increased the cost of Tempete for Albrecht de Bordelot. In exchange for some slight stat changes, looks like very mild ones. General buffs to Hippogriff mounts, it seems. Let's see. The Green Knight, they slightly changed the way he runs. It looks like he runs a little bit faster now. He can change speeds faster, at least. They increased his entity mass, which he probably needed. General mass increases for units on horses. Mild morale debuffs for all of the peasant units. Again, not a shock. And the Grail Relics can now hit less entities per splash attack. Yeah, because Grail Relics were way too strong, right? I don't know. There may actually have been a Grail Relic cheese I was not aware of. I forgot the Battle Pilgrims had a leadership of 80. Down to 75, that's still pretty good for Bretonnians. I forgot they had a leadership of 80. That's dwarf level leadership. For a peasant unit, unbuffed, that was crazy. And yeah, just general, lot of stuff that is, the Holy Wardens of La Mazental are now immune to contact effects. Odd change. And a lot of the changes, yeah, that they talked about are just being seen across the board here. Now, what's the degree of armor-piercing attacks? Let's see. Armor-piercing damage has been doubled, while base weapon damage has only been reduced by 5. Sheesh. Okay. 120 armor, that is chaos level degrees of armor. Mild reduction of charge bonus. Minus 12 entities. Increased cost. Woof. Okay, so Grail Knights are now going to be up closer to the Blood Knight range for cost. An upkeep increase from 375 to 450 is going to be a big hit for Bretonians in campaign. Let's see, they've changed the speed, they're going to be a little bit faster. So, the Grail Knights now serve more of a dedicated purpose in the roster rather than just being Knights but better as your low entity armor piercing unit. So that's cool to see, because it did feel a bit odd that Grail Knights were just kind of better across the board, and there wasn't an armor piercing cavalry other than the Knights of the Questing Knights. Because a lot of times in the late game as Bretonia, you'd ignore Grail Knights in favor of Questing Knights just because you're going to be seeing so much armor in the late campaign. Especially if you're going to be going up against a lot of Warriors of Chaos. Grail Guardians, even bigger changes because they had their entity count reduced even more. Not a huge shock. The Grail Guardians had a lot of big buffs in the last update. So they are now just a crazy heroic. They're pretty well a unit of 32 hero. Yeah, pretty well 32 heroes. Which is more or less what Grail Knights were on the tabletop, if memory serves. So, some nice changes to Bretonia. Yeah. Makes several of their units more distinctive. The Grail Relic and Knight and Peasant changes in particular sound interesting, as well as making Knights Errant. It now sounds like Knights of the Realm are the generic Knights. Because Knights Errant will now have their distinctive role in the army. Now that I'm thinking about it, I should look. Have they had their price change? No, they haven't. Okay. Chaos Dwarfs. Let's see. Hopefully they got a lot of nerfs. Because, hoo boy. Oh, Kadai got buffed. I did hear Kadai were a bit fragile, but the one time I used them in campaign, which admittedly, I only got 14 turns into a Chaos Dwarf campaign. Not because I had a problem with them, but just simply because there have been a lot of video games lately that have been taking my attention. And there's been a lot of stuff I've been recording for the Devolution group channel. And I've been running around doing a lot of stuff with my family. But you can see here on the channel, I've put a lot more time into Street Fighter, into Gladius, into Fire Pro, and as a result, Total War Warhammer has not taken up quite so much of my time. The Skullcracker has seemingly received big buffs. The Iron Demon is now able to move and shoot properly. The Magma Cannon has received a range nerf. The Deathstreaker has a higher degree of accuracy, and the Dreadquake has more range. I did hear the Magma Cannon was far and away the best Chaos Dwarf artillery unit. Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lords no longer lose their immortality upon Confederation. That seems to be a problem really often for both Crave Assembly and for modders. It's an easy thing to forget, I guess. Fixed a script error, removed Infernal Engineer from Drazoth's Cinderbreath mount. Oh, he'd pick up a weird ability when he got put on Cinderbreath. Okay. Unit customization will now work when used in conjunction with the Magma Cannon or Deathstreaker. Was that meaning like you couldn't apply Infernal to them? Or what was it? Demon? I don't know. Fixed a visual bug where the armament production value was not taking into consideration the armament mod. Oh. I am very sorry here. Ooh. Fixed a bug where the armament production value it was a visual bug, did not seem to affect the amount you actually got, was not taking into consideration the armament modifier bonus value. And I'm just going to go through here. Let's see what are the quickest. Collect income checkbox should no longer be visible in the building browser. You cannot choose to turn off collect income anymore. Interesting. Drazoth no longer counts towards the hero cap in multiplayer. Yeah, it looks like a lot of just bug changes that I was not entirely aware of. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything in particular I'd want to talk about. Most of what I'm interested in, Astrogoth Iron Hand, but net nerfs, yeah, it sounded like he needed them. He looked crazy strong from the outset as soon as you looked at him in the trailers. And some mild changes, just looks like, let's see, some multiplayer cost reductions, or some buffs. A little more encouragement to take Overseers instead of Sorcerer Prophets. Which Sorcerer Prophets seem like really good lords, so I'm not sure why they were... around that price range with Overseers. Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses have only removed attribute charge defense versus large. That is a surprise, because blunderbusses seemed really strong from everything I'd seen. Of course, Creative Assembly has their own ideas in mind for the way things are balanced, and you know, they're less likely to just decide balance changes off of one or two battles where blunderbusses do really well, or one or two YouTube videos, which is to their benefit most of the time. Infernal Ironsworn, yeah, these guys needed some changes. The reduction in missile damage and armor piercing, thank God. Yeah, okay, the naphtha that the Infernal Ironsworn throw will not just annihilate enemy units anymore. That is a big nerf to the naphtha bombs. Oh, no, wait, okay, the explosion damage has been increased. Well, it's been switched, now it's not so armor piercing. Getting hit with the naphtha itself does virtually no damage. It's the AoE that it makes when it hits. Okay. But it's still a big reduction to armor piercing, so the Infernal Ironsworn will in particular not just dunk on Iron Breakers anymore. Because that was very funny when the DLC first launched. Everyone showing how Iron Breakers versus Infernal Ironsworn was just not a matchup. They'd both get into range to throw their missiles, and the Iron Breakers would just get annihilated by the initial salvo of naphtha bombs. It was ridiculous. Bull Centaur Renders hopefully got some big nerfs, because those guys were just cartoonish. Like that, in particular, Bull Centaur Renders struck me as an odd one. Why are they so strong when they're not really that important of a unit for the Chaos Dwarf identity? Let's see, not some huge nerfs. They have less capability to pull out. They have less capability to turn backwards and pull out after a charge, so cycle charging seemingly is less of a valid possibility. Reduced missile block chance, reduced melee attack. Looks like, yeah, we're seeing pretty well this all across the board. Some slight price increases, though not as much as you'd expect. Yeah, some very mild buffs, mild nerfs, but I can understand them wanting to only mildly nerf these units. Especially because nerfs will make people upset regardless of how much the unit actually need to be nerfed. Yeah, okay. And it looks like, I'll look at the Skullcracker real quick, because that's one. I need to wrap this up very soon, because it's 3 minutes until the show starts. The Skulls show starts. So, let me go ahead. Skullcracker, reduced turns to recruit. Yeah, I don't know why it took 3 turns. That was weird to begin with. Considerably increased melee attack, melee defense, charge bonus, armor, weapon damage, really just buffs across the board. Sheesh. And they don't even have increased cost. Woo. That's good to see, because the Skullcracker before, it didn't make any sense why you were just paying that much just for a unit with Wallbreaker. Okay, and it's going to look like, okay, Dark Elf Slave update. Dark Elves now have the ability to consume their slaves in order to rush construction. That's a huge change. High control, I may have to switch in mid-recording to Warhammer's Twitch for the Skulls thing. Yeah. High control now reduces slave consumption with the process, within the province. Okay, so we're taking all the Chaos Dwarf systems here. Post-battle slave rewards have been rebalanced to offer more base rewards, but slightly less from post-battle options. Slave rewards from raiding have been improved. Raiding always needs improvements. It never gives as much as you would expect. Remove the construction speed buffs from maintaining large amounts of slaves. Okay, there's a lot of stuff here that seems like it could be really interesting. But there is no time. Yeah, and it looks like small changes for everybody else. All high elf cavalry now run at 84 speed. Nice. Juggernauts have lost a bit of mass. Armored Kossars have 10 more entities, so they're less crappy of a frontline unit. Red-crested skinks are now immune to contact effects. They don't care about poison. That's very nice. That's an extra reason to take them. I always like red-crested skinks, but they never feel quite as good as I would want. The axe dude on the back of the Ice Wolf chariot now has animations. That's funny. Femur with dual weapons are back to being an anti-infantry unit instead of an anti-large unit. No big changes for Nurgle. Not really any big changes for Ogres, except that now Slaughtermasters and Butchers are immune to contact effects. And now Noblar Trappers have bonus versus infantry. That's cool. Nikari has received some buffs. Apparently. Doesn't look like a lot of huge changes for a lot of people. The damned units for the Vampire Coast have received some buffs, even though you don't use them, except if you're playing Slostra, and even then it's only from an ability. I would love to see the damned units have more accessibility in campaign. Made Dead Rise Again less strong. That's good. I heard that one was a nightmare. Each of the Wood Elf dancers now have 2 dances. Really? Okay, so, the Blade Singers and the War Dancers get access to the dances of the other units. That's really cool, because I think the dances are what make War Dancers and Blade Singers a really fascinating unit to use. And makes them more flexible than many Wood Elf units. Many Wood Elf units are rigidly built for one purpose, and they're terrible at doing anything else. Which I love, that's the Wood Elf identity. They're all glass cannons, they're all specialists. But what makes the War Dancers and Blade Singers special is the fact that they aren't specialists, that they can be used for so many different roles. They can be offensive, defensive, fast, slow, meat shield, whatever you need them to do. Anti-missile, anti-melee. Okay, let's see. And some campaign changes. Does not look anything big. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything big. Endless survival battles no longer limit the enemy army spawn to 20 in co-op. And fix some graphical changes. Okay, there is one here that I am looking for. So, I am out of time. So, let me Control F. Oh, it's not bringing it up. Well, nonetheless, I'll just look for it here with my own 2 eyes. Inconceivable. Did they fix the weird issue with Centaurs having no chins? I mean, there must be a find on page button, right? You can tell I've only recently started using Firefox. Here we go. Oh, it's at the bottom. Okay, I'm used to Chrome where it's at the top. That's it. That's the only instance of Centaurs. Okay, Centaurs are going to keep the lack of chins. Good to know. Alright, and the very last thing, let's hit the bottom of the page. I hope there is not anything important at the start of the Warhammer stream. We hope you're happy with the changes we've made as we continue to absorb all your feedback and aim for the base balance possible. Now we're done, why not jump straight into the game and check out the Bretonia update, dish out the SmackDown as a new legendary hero, or fight against the will of Hashut. Or you could always enact Hashut's will, barring any fixes. The next update after this will be Update 4.0, the summer. So judging by how warm it was last night, that's not far off. Okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to see the Shadows of Change update, and then after that, Total War Warhammer 3 is going to be taking a break until the winter, while Total War Pharaoh takes the majority of Creative Assembly's attention. So, get hyped. Alright, I gotta wrap this video up now. Bye.